Happy Halloween! You know, this is a great holiday, and because it's such a great holiday, I want to do something really special. And so I thought I'd tell you a true story. This is a story of sadness, loss, and fear of the unknown. So come with me as I journey into the ocean to find lost knowledge, hidden secrets, and disturb the ghosts of the past. This Halloween I'm going to tell you the story of the demon ship. The ocean is an amazing thing. Its beauty and majesty is undescribable. It contains a massive diversity of life. It has been a source of food and trade for humanity and allowed our advancement as a species. And it was most probably where God first created life. But as magnificent as the ocean is, it must also be treated with the utmost respect and fear. For in those dark, cold, icy waters, danger may be lurking. Sometimes, when people sail out into the ocean, strange, unexplainable things can happen. Sometimes, when people sail out into the ocean, they don't come back. In the 1860s, a ship called the Mary Celeste was preparing for its maiden voyage. It was 103 feet long and 25 feet wide. The ship was brought by a man named Winchester, and the captain's name was Benjamin Spooner Briggs. And yes, that was his actual name. His name was Spooner. Sometimes it feels like people's names predestine them for a certain job. Anyway, the ship was supposed to sail from New York City to Genoa, Italy. Captain Briggs was an extremely experienced sailor, and he handpicked the crew himself. The only inexperienced members of the crew were his wife and daughter, who he brought along with him for some reason. I don't know why, but he decided to. Still, all of the other members of the crew were handpicked by him, and they were all expert sailors. The crew was quite small, consisting of only 7 crewmen, Briggs and his family. 10 people in total. The cargo was 1,701 barrels of ethanol. Ethanol is a kind of alcohol that cannot be consumed by humans because the alcohol content is too high. The alcohol content is normally around 70 to 99%. If you drank this, you would die. It's normally used for medical purposes or sterilizing things. On November 5th, the ship set out for Italy. Another ship called the De Gratia was making a similar journey. On December 5th, the De Gratia came across the Mary Celeste, floating in the water. The Celeste was moving quite strangely. The captain of the De Gratia knew that the Celeste had left earlier than his ship, and that they should be way ahead of him. By now, the Celeste should have been near Italy, if not in Italy, and yet here it was, just floating in the middle of the ocean. When they got closer, they noticed that there didn't appear to be anyone moving around on the ship's deck, and the ship itself was just floating aimlessly through the sea. The captain of the De Gratia was confused as to why the Celeste was just floating aimlessly in the water, so he decided to make his men board the ship. As the crew of the De Gratia got closer to the Celeste, they were surely expecting someone to come on deck and greet them, but nobody came out. As they got even closer, they noticed there was something strange about the ship's sails. Some of them had been unfurled, but some of them were still folded up. They were in a state that would have made sailing extremely difficult. They knew that the crew of the Celeste were experienced sailors, and they wouldn't be so lazy as to leave them in an unfinished state. The captain of the De Gratia presumably began to get worried that something bad may have happened. Perhaps, he thought, while changing the sails, one of the crew had gotten injured, and the rest of the crew were in the bows of the ship trying to save them. As the De Gratia got closer to the Celeste, the captain of the De Gratia must have been getting a bad feeling. Even if the crew were on the lower levels of the ship dealing with some kind of emergency, there should still be at least one person coming onto deck to greet them. Now, ordinarily, this kind of situation would be quite worrying, finding a ship drifting out in the middle of the ocean. That would be strange under normal circumstances. The captain of the De Gratia may have been especially worried, because the drifting ship in question was the Mary Celeste, and the Celeste had a negative reputation. It was seen as somewhat unlucky. You see, the Mary Celeste was not the ship's original name. The ship was actually a reconverted ship. The ship's original name was the Amazon. Its maiden voyage was from Canada to London. However, the journey had to be delayed because the captain mysteriously got sick and died. So they found a new captain, and the Amazon set sail. However, unfortunately, it crashed into some fishing equipment in Maine. They accidentally smashed into another ship, sinking it. Years later, the Amazon was caught in a storm and ran ashore, leaving it as a wreck. The ship was disowned, and later its wreckage was brought. It was repaired and made into the Mary Celeste. So as you can see, the Celeste already had a history of strange bad things happening to it. Unfortunately, it's unlikely that the captain of the de Gratia knew about the Celeste's infamous history, but if he did, he must have been creeped out. The de Gratia finally boarded the Celeste. The captain sent 2 men on board to find out what was going on, and what they found was chilling. They explored the ship from deck to hull, and they found nobody. Not one man. Not a single soul. This was obviously extremely strange and worrying, but no matter how much they searched, they couldn't find anybody, so they decided to explore the rest of the ship to see what they could find. In the cargo room, they found around 3.5 feet of water. Now this sounds quite bad, but actually for a ship of that era, it was perfectly normal. Remember, ships used to be made of wood, and water would seep in through the gaps. This water would just get pumped back out by the crew, so actually the amount of water in the cargo hold was perfectly normal for a ship of this type. The water depth inside the ship was normally measured using a device called a sounding rod, but they found the sounding rod just lying on the deck. One of the 2 pumps had been taken apart for some reason, but the other one was working perfectly fine. One of the lifeboats was missing, and its rope had been cut, which was strange because normally sailors didn't cut rope while at sea because it was a finite resource. The fact they cut the rope seems to suggest they were rushing to get off and away from the ship. The crew found the ship's binnacle. A binnacle was a device used to contain a compass. The binnacle had been pushed over and the glass was cracked. But this is strange because binnacles are extremely heavy, so you would have to exert force to do this. 2 of the hatches on the lower part of the ship had been left open, which is strange because normally they keep them closed to keep moisture out of the bows of the ship. Overall, the ship was in good shape. Its rigging had been slightly damaged, but apart from that, it was perfectly intact. The crew found the captain's log. Luckily, the captain had been extremely diligent when it came to keeping records. The captain made new logs every hour, and he gave his coordinates. The log recorded every event happening on the ship every hour, until it suddenly stopped at 8 AM on November 25th. So the disaster must have happened around 8 AM. According to the coordinates given, the ship had drifted around 400 miles since its last recorded location. The only thing missing was the captain's navigational equipment. Everything else, including the personal belongings of the crew, was still there. There was enough food and water in storage to last them for 6 months. Now I'll continue talking about this event in a moment, but for a moment I would also like to point out that what happened after the Celeste was found and rescued was also very interesting. After the Mary Celeste was found and taken back to civilization, it was sold, but people didn't want anything to do with it. Even after it had been sold, it continued to lose money. Then, one of the ship's new captains became mysteriously ill and died, just like the first captain had way back when the Celeste was still the Amazon. Now, if it were me, at this point, I would just send the ship out to sea and set it on fire. Now, the ship's new captain was upset about losing money, so he decided to use the ship for insurance fraud. He had the ship wreck on purpose to try and make some money. However, his plot failed. The disgrace ruined his reputation, and 3 months later he died in poverty. One of his accomplices went insane, and the other one took their own life. Still, at least the demon ship was finally destroyed. However, the question remains, what happened to the crew of the Mary Celeste? Well, I think we should go over some of the possible explanations to see what happened. Now, you may have come up with some explanations as to what could have happened. For instance, you may be thinking, well, maybe it was pirates. However, that doesn't make any sense, because nothing had been stolen. None of the 1,700 barrels of alcohol were missing. The crew's personal property hadn't been taken, and there was nothing to suggest violence had transpired. Now you may be saying, well, maybe the ship just ran into a huge storm. However, this doesn't make sense either, because if it did, then all of the cargo and the crew's personal property would have been thrown everywhere. But instead, it was exactly where it should be. Also, there were several open containers of ink and oil sitting out. And obviously, if there had been a massive storm, they would have been knocked over. Also, this explanation doesn't make any sense anyway. If there was a storm, then why on earth would they get in a lifeboat? The safest thing they could do if faced with a storm would be to just try and weather it out by staying on the ship. Getting in a lifeboat would be an awful idea because the lifeboat would be even more likely to capsize. Marks were found on the front of the ship, and a strange substance was found which they thought was blood. But it turned out this substance was just a mixture of rust and dirt. For some reason, a lot of people have a strong anti-Christian bias, and so Christians get blamed for a lot of stuff. For instance, we got blamed for the fall of Rome, if you can believe it. One famous historian tried to blame us for destroying the Roman Empire. So we got blamed for a lot of stuff. And we were also blamed for this particular event. One suggestion as to what happened was, because Captain Briggs was a devout Christian, they suggested that maybe he just went insane and murdered everybody. Because, you know, Christians are crazy or something. So what happened to the crew? Well, various things have been suggested, such as water sprouts, which are a kind of underwater tornado, or a sea quake, but these explanations don't really make sense, because they would have definitely spilled the ink containers. It was also suggested that perhaps the alcohol fumes were igniting in the cargo hold, causing explosions. The crew may have opened the two hatches to try and vent out the toxic gas, or perhaps the hatches were blown open when there was a huge alcohol fume explosion. Now you would think, wouldn't that leave like massive burn marks and be really obvious? However, not necessarily, because they did an experiment, and as it turns out, this particular kind of explosion probably wouldn't have caused burn marks. However, it's kind of doubtful whether this explanation really works, because the sailors were all very experienced, so it doesn't really make sense that they would just get scared and leave ship. And the ship wasn't actually damaged, so are you trying to tell me that they got so scared they abandoned ship without even checking the damage? I don't think experienced sailors would do that. Now in reality there was probably a perfectly reasonable, normal explanation as to what happened, but it's Halloween, so let's talk about some creepy stuff. In Japanese folklore, they tell tales about the ghosts of people who have died at sea. They say they come back to possess and kill sailors. The Japanese also speak of a woman who appears on beaches. She carries a child, and when people come over to her, she reveals her true monstrous form and consumes them. The Japanese also have tales of a creature called the Whale Princess. It's said to be a ghost whale that can take on the form of a beautiful woman. The Japanese say it brings bad fortune. African folklore talks about a water spirit who takes on the form of a beautiful woman and lures sailors and fishermen to their watery graves. Scottish folklore talks about a creature called a kelpie, which is a water spirit that takes the form of a horse and tries to entice people to ride it, especially children. When the person gets on the kelpie, it rides into the water and drowns them to death. There's also the legend of the Flying Dutchman, a ghost ship that's been seen quite often. Apparently the ship's captain wanted to round the Cape of Good Hope during a storm. His sailors told him not to do it, and even the devil himself told him not to do it, but he ignored them and tried anyway, and he lost the lives of all of his men and himself. And as punishment for his stubbornness, now he and his crew must sail the seas forever. Now, whether any of these monsters actually exist in real life is unlikely. However, if I had to guess which monster was behind all this, I would have to go with the sirens. The sirens are from Greek mythology. Apparently they sang a song so beautiful that it would lure sailors in. Sailors would sail their ship towards the song and crash into the rocks, drowning to death. To me, this is a perfect explanation as to what happened. Why was there no evidence of violence? Why was nothing stolen? Why was the ship perfectly intact with everything in order? It's possible the sailors heard the song of the sirens, they got in the lifeboat, and they walked into the water. Many cultures also have folklore about mermaids, who are very like sirens. Mermaids lure sailors in with their beauty before killing them. Sometimes the mermaids will drown sailors who get too close to them. Stories about mermaids are very far spread. Even the Japanese have stories about mermaids. So there you go, it was the mermaids. You don't need a scientific explanation, it was the mermaids. Ultimately, I don't know what happened to the crew of the Mary Celeste, but I am glad that demon ship is buried under the waves forever. It's amazing to think that a ship and its cargo could just be drifting out at sea. All that money just drifting out at sea. It could have sank and all of that money would have sunk to the bottom of the ocean. There's a lot of treasure in the ocean, and if you're anything like me, you treasure high quality YouTube content, and that's why you should subscribe to this channel. If you subscribe to this channel, you'll help me create higher quality YouTube content. And subscribing is completely free, so it won't cost you anything, and it will help me create better YouTube content for you. So why wouldn't you subscribe? If you're going to get better YouTube content and it's completely free, why not subscribe? And after you dive deep into the ocean and find the hidden treasure of the subscribe button, dive a little deeper because there's also a like button. Happy Halloween! I'm the Shadow Critic and I gotta go fuck!